Hi, my name's Lemuel and welcome to Self-Invested. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the leasehold reform changes that the government announced on Thursday, the 7th of January 2021. So what I want to do is explain the changes that the government's announced to the leasehold systems, what that means for you as a leaseholder or a prospective leaseholder, and when we're likely to see these changes implemented. So the government announced three significant changes. The first is that leaseholders are going to be able to extend their leases for 990 years. Now this goes for leaseholders of both flats and houses. Secondly, they've announced that they're going to abolish ground rent for all new leases. So this goes for new leases from when a lease is extended, but also for new build properties. And the third major announcement that they made was that marriage value is going to be abolished. Now, marriage value is an amount that leaseholders pay to extend their lease when their lease drops below 80 years. In this video, I'm going to try and break down these changes as best I can. It's quite fresh. I haven't really prepared much. I've got a few notes down here about what I want to discuss, so please bear with me. It might be a bit rough, but hopefully I can explain what I need to say as clearly as possible and you will find this information helpful. The first change that the government has announced is that leaseholders will be able to extend their leases by 990 years. Currently, if a leaseholder of a flat wants to extend their lease through the statutory route, they can only extend their lease by 90 years. According to the changes that were announced, this means that leaseholders of flats are going to be able to extend their lease by 900 more years, which essentially means that they're not going to have to worry about extending their lease again. With a 90-year extension, I don't think that's something that the leaseholder will have to worry about. But maybe if, say, they had 80 years on their lease and they extended it by 90, so it went up to 170, it's possibly going to be something that maybe their grandchildren or their great-grandchildren will have to worry about when the lease is running down. With a 990-year lease extension, they don't really have to worry much about having to renew a lease or having their property returned back to the freeholder after the lease ends. It's such a long lease that it's not going to be a worry. With leasehold houses, this is possibly an even bigger change because the statutory route to increase the length of lease with a house is only 50 years. So say there was a house that had a lease of 80 years and that leaseholder of the house wanted to extend the lease, they would only be able to extend it to 130 years. And in addition to that, the ground rent that the leaseholder of that house would pay would actually increase as a consequence. It would actually become equivalent to a modern ground rent, which is usually more expensive than the existing ground rent of a leasehold house. So although the leaseholder of a house may have a longer lease after they extend it, it may actually cost them more yearly because of the increased ground rent. With the lease being extended by 990 years as well for leasehold flats, this is going to be a major improvement. But as we sort of discuss next, ground rents is also going to be removed. So when a leaseholder of a house extends their lease, they're no longer going to have to pay any ground rent. It's going to be a peppercorn rent. That was already the case for lease extensions for flats, but this is something new for leasehold houses. So those are the major improvements that we're going to get with leasehold houses and leasehold flats. And arguably, well, quite clearly, it's a bigger improvement for leasehold houses. Also, as part of this, the government have announced that to help standardize what the cost will be to extend the lease of a flat or a house, there's going to be an online calculator that they create to give leaseholders a good understanding of what they need to pay. At the moment, the way it's calculated is a bit convoluted, and you as a leaseholder have to make an offer to the freeholder for how much you think the lease is worth, the lease extension is worth, and then the freeholder can come back and pluck any number out of the air and say that this is what they think you should pay. And at the moment, it's very skewed in the favor of the freeholder, and more times than not, the leaseholder gets done over by the freeholder. So what the government are announcing is that there's going to be an online calculator that they are managing, which gives leaseholders a good indication of what they need to pay. So no longer will be the case where, well, hopefully no longer will be the case where freeholders can just pluck out a number out of the air and be very unreasonable and force leaseholders to pay over the odds. But we need to sort of wait and see exactly how this change is going to be implemented. The second change, which I mentioned, is that ground rent is being abolished for all new leases. Now, this goes for lease extensions and also for new leases for new build properties. Now, this is a major improvement. In case you don't know what ground rent is, I covered it in my last video, freehold versus leasehold. But it's essentially an amount that a leaseholder has to pay a freeholder for having an apartment or a flat or even a house situated on land that doesn't belong to them, land that belongs to the freeholder. The thing is, with leasehold properties, when you buy leasehold properties, I covered this in my last video, um, the amount that you pay to buy that property is almost the same as what it would cost to buy the freehold. There's only like a 1% difference. So it's not even like when you buy the freehold, buy the leasehold of a house, you're getting it for a lower price because you're only buying the right to live there for a certain period of time. When you buy a leasehold property, you're essentially paying the same amount as you would pay if you were buying a freehold of that property, but you don't have the same rights, and there's still ongoing costs that you need to pay to a freeholder. Now, in some cases, these costs can be very high. There's a leasehold scandal where certain leaseholders had ground rent that was doubling every 10 years and was running into the thousands. With this change that's being made, this means that for new build properties, there's not going to be any ground rent at all. So there's no longer going to be this leasehold scandal. As well, if a leaseholder is extending their lease, especially for houses now, there's not going to be any ground rent to pay once that lease is extended. This change is something that was already announced under the new Help to Buy scheme. So for any properties sold under the new Help to Buy scheme from April this year, the properties that are sold cannot have any ground rent on them. And this was a major improvement for the scheme. And as a consequence, what we've actually seen builders do, or the developers, the builders, the people that are selling these properties do, is actually grant longer leases. So there are actually three developers that have announced that they're going to extend the length of lease that they initially give to leaseholders. That's Countryside, who have said that they're going to be granting 250-year leases when leases are usually 125 years, and Barrett and Bellway Homes, who have both said that they're going to be granted 999 years leases, which is almost as good as having a freehold. Now, we're probably going to see a lot more developers, or most developers now, doing this when they're selling new build properties, because there's no longer going to be as much money to make in granting short leases or shorter leases, because there's no longer this reward that they'll get from ground rent. If ground rent's removed from leasehold agreements with freeholders, it means that the cost of extending leases is going to be lower. It's not going to be nearly as profitable as it was for house builders as it previously was. So what we're finding now is that house builders are actually granting much longer leases, which is making it which is making the leasehold system a much better place for home buyers. Now, the third announcement that the government made was that marriage value was going to be abolished. Now, marriage value is an amount that leaseholders have to pay to extend their lease when their lease drops below 80 years. Now, this is an additional amount to what leaseholders would have to pay if their lease was 80 years or longer. From my understanding, the marriage value usually costs half of the increase in value there would be once the lease is extended. So, say for example, without a lease extension, um, the cost of a house or the value of a house was £200,000. But if that lease was extended, then the value of that house would increase to £300,000. The leaseholder would have to compensate the freeholder half of that amount, half of the difference, which is the half of the difference is 100,000, and half of that is 50,000. The leaseholder would have to compensate the freeholder 15,000 for the fact that the lease has dropped below 80 years and is being extended and increasing in value. So by abolishing marriage value, it's going to make it a lot more affordable for people that have leases below 80 years to extend their leases. This as well means that granting short leases is less of an incentive for house builders, just as not having any ground rent is less of an incentive to issue shorter leases to leaseholders, because there's less money to be made when leases are extended. And this was a genuine sort of revenue source. They would actually sell the freehold to other people. Sometimes these were pension funds, because the pension funds knew there was profit to be made once leaseholders had to extend their leases after, let's say, 20 years or a number of years, when their lease was dropping below, getting close to 80 years. And if they didn't renew it, if the leaseholder didn't renew their lease, eventually that property would become the property of the pension fund, and the pension fund will be able to sell that property and make profit for their fund. So by removing marriage value, there's going to be less of an incentive for house builders to issue shorter leases, and we're likely to see much longer leases like what has been announced by Countryside, Barrett and Bellway Homes. So it's not clear when and how the change is going to be implemented, but the fact that this announcement has been made is a big step in the leasehold reform, or the reform of the whole leasehold system. But we need to wait and see how these changes are actually implemented, because they haven't given any timescales for when these changes are going to be implemented, and we don't exactly know how they're going to be implemented. I know that one question I'm probably going to get down in the comments is whether these changes are going to be retrospective. So for people that already have leases, does this mean that their ground rent's going to be abolished? And for people that have extended their lease already, does this mean that they're going to get an extra 900 years? If I'm being honest, I think it's unlikely that there are going to be any retrospective or retroactive changes to leases that already exist. I think this is going to be to future leases that are issued, and lease extensions that are done. But yeah, we don't know. We have to wait and see. But I hope that there are some changes to existing leases, because this whole system, this whole current system, is a bit of a scandal. There's no reason why somebody should be paying a similar amount to what it would cost to buy a freehold and just only get a leasehold, where they only have the right to live in that property for a certain period of time. Now that brings us to the end of the video. Sorry if it was a bit rough. I didn't really have much time to prepare. I just put a few notes down on my notepad, and really wanted to get this video out because I thought it was great news and something that you would be interested in. But what I am going to do is keep you all up to date with any other announcements that are made about these changes. So if you haven't already, please make sure you subscribe to the channel just to be kept up to date with these leasehold reform changes. And also just subscribe if you want to learn more about leases. I've done quite a few videos on leases. I've done a video on leasehold extensions and the whole process involved. It's something that I've done myself as well. And I've done a video on freehold versus leasehold, trying to give people a better understanding of what the difference is between a freehold and a leasehold. So yeah, make sure you check my videos, click on my channel, have a look at the videos. I'm sure there'll be something there to interest you. And yeah, if you want to get more content like this, please subscribe. Also, if you enjoyed the video, and please give it a like. And if you have any questions or comments, anything I got wrong, anything that I missed, please let me know down in the comments. And I'll see you at the next video. Take care. Bye.